What's up, gifted family? Welcome to another episode of the show that is the GP YouTube. Just a reminder that if you support what we do here, make sure to go over to giftedperformance.com and sign up for our automated coaching service. For only $1 a day, you'll get access to 15 highly customized training programs, a macronutrient calculator, our meal planning feature that lets you build and save meals based on your macros, as well as access to our private Facebook group. All subscriptions help us in continuing to put out great content to get you to your fitness goals. Thanks for stopping by, and without any further delay, let's get into today's video. Enjoy.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the GPP, the Gifted Performance Podcast, where we give you all of the information needed to improve your own general physical preparedness. I am sitting across from the man who taught me via YouTube how to weightlift. And Greg, I'm sorry for being so bad at weightlifting. I know it's a reflection. I know it's a poor reflection on you, but nonetheless, I give it my best effort. How are you today, Greg?
I'm doing well. Don't worry about it. Anything that happens on the other side of YouTube for me is your fault. So I don't feel bad at all.
That's an amazing way to look at it. Greg, have you ever thought about kind of looking into YouTube's data and tracking views and invoicing people for all the people that you've coached?
That would be amazing if I could figure out how to do that. I would rather invoice the people who complain. The people who enjoy it, I don't want to charge them one penny.
If I figure out how to do that, are you okay with me keeping 90% and sending you 10% of that money?
We'll negotiate the percentage at some point, but I will give you a cut if you can figure out the technology.
You drive a hard
we do complain about Ryan a lot. There's
some complaining about not sticking to percentages, but honestly, percentages are like stop signs. They're more suggestions than requirements.
Yeah, I would mostly agree with that.
Perfect. Annie, we've also got Miss Gun Show here. Annie, how are you?
I'm doing really, really well. It's a wild time in the DMV, but we are here. We are safe. We're fine.
We got a hurricane coming for us down here. Tropical storm, maybe? Yeah, Greg, you're flying into the eye of the storm, just so you know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm used to it.
All right, cool. So for anyone who lives under a rock on the moon, because that's the only way you don't know who Greg is obviously the co-founder of Catalyst Athletics. Greg, just give the people a little bit of an intro into yourself, your personal competitive history, athletic history. Tell us about the bike riding, because I know that you were a BMX rider, right?
Trials, actually. I mean, I rode BMX, but not as a competitor. I competed in observed trials, like 1.5 lifetimes ago. So, I mean, athletic history, name a sport. I probably played it at some point, and then I can probably list a handful that I did that you haven't heard of, including bike trials. But yeah, I mean, that's essentially just like going through obstacle courses on a bike. You don't really do a whole lot of pedaling. It's actually one of the goofiest things you can do on a bicycle, but, leave it to me to find some stupid, obscure sport like that. Next one was weightlifting, almost as obscure, slightly less stupid. At least it's in the Olympics, right?
At least for now.
Well, for now, yeah. So, I mean, got into weightlifting as a young teenager, kind of had to figure it out myself, which is why I didn't really go anywhere with it. This was pre-Google times, if anyone remembers those. So you couldn't get online and look up weightlifting coach near me. Although years later, of course, I found out that one of the most decorated weightlifting coaches in the country lived about 45 minutes north of me. So had I been able to find him, that probably would have changed the course of my life a little bit, but it worked out in the long run. So I was training people from age 18 on in various capacities, co-owned the 4th CrossFit affiliate gym with Rob Wolf and his wife, Nikki, going back to, God, I don't even remember, 2003, maybe. So, Rob helped start the original CrossFit affiliate up in Seattle, moved down to Northern California, Chico, where I met him. And then I partnered up with him and Nikki and had that gym for a few years. And then I started Catalyst Athletics in 2006 when I was down in Southern California being coached by Mike Bergner, which is where I really started my competitive weightlifting. A little late, a little long in the tooth at that point, but which is kind of why it was a more natural transition for me into coaching, since my potential as a competitive weightlifter was somewhat limited by that, late entry, taking it seriously. So even though I had technically been doing the lifts for years prior to that, I wasn't exposed to weightlifting as a sport, in the sense that I didn't have access to coaching. I didn't have access to a training facility where I could do it properly. And so I kind of had to get in on that a little bit late, which was good, I think, from a coaching perspective, because I was an adult and paying more attention to what was going on. And I think I picked up a lot more and essentially was able to have an apprenticeship with Mike Bergner that made that transition a lot easier.
So you've talked a lot in the past about your relationship with Mike Bergner. What was kind of the driving force, or what was the final decision that drove you down the weightlifting path instead of the CrossFit path?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I wasn't ever really considering the CrossFit path. I found it in a really roundabout way. Essentially, my neighbor in Chico was a sheriff's deputy who trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with the guy, John Frankel, who shared space with Rob Wolf, who had just tried to start this CrossFit gym. So the CrossFit gym is a generous description. It was like the back fifth of this, 2,000 square foot light industrial. Yeah. And so it was some rubber mats, some pull-up bars, a rope, and, a couple of bars that actually spun, and some bumper plates, which was really all we needed at that point. But he basically said, hey, this guy I do jits with is looking for someone to basically trade training for building a website. And I was doing that on the side among 400 other things. So I was like, yeah, I'm not really that interested, but I'll go talk to him anyway. And Rob happened to be there that day, and he talked me into coming training with them. And I was like, wow, this is super goofy. And then, after a few days, I was like, okay, I get it now. Weightlifting, sprinting, gymnastics, this is actually a really fucking good idea. And of course, this was 2003, so it was considerably different than it is now, even in terms of programming. I don't mean that just in the popularity or the accessibility. It was really a different approach, in terms of programming and training and kind of the way people thought of it. So the weightlifting thing was kind of the natural, like, hey, now I finally have, I had met Mike Bergner. So like, hey, I finally have access now to somebody who can help me down this path of weightlifting that I very likely would have pursued at a younger age, had I had access to it. So it was kind of a natural decision.
Mike definitely had they brought him on as a guest commentator. I don't know if you saw that for the CrossFit, the trials that they had. Actually, it might've been the Rogue Invitational, and he had some really funny input on that, about a couple of lifts and how they looked, or how he wasn't so happy with how they looked. But just staying on the topic of weightlifting, you said you would comment on this. I'm selfishly asking this question very briefly. The situation with the IWF, because we emailed a month ago, and the situation was very different than it currently is today. So I really just wanted to get your take on, are you in the camp of doom and gloom? This may be the 2021, maybe the last time we see weightlifting in the Olympics, or are you more on the positive, like, hey, we'll get this figured out train?
I think I'm kind of riding the fence, honestly. I think I'm doom and gloom in the sense that I'm very aware of the potential for it to be removed from the Olympics. Like, it is a really serious possibility. And I don't think enough of the right people agree with that, right? I think that the people kind of pushing the IWF this direction really feel like they can operate with impunity. They think they can do whatever they've been doing for the past several decades, and it's just going to kind of work itself out. And I don't think that's the case anymore. And I think the IOC has made that clear on multiple occasions. So I do think they're really tempting fate with all the shenanigans. That said, I'm optimistic, based on a number of things. But, for example, when they booted Ursula and Phil and put the guy from Thailand in as interim CEOs, like, you guys are replacing. Yeah, you're putting in a guy from a country that is currently banned for drug positives. This seems like a really poor choice. Short-sighted would be the generous way to put it. And but there was so much pushback on that I guess they pulled him again. So I do think there is the potential for enough outside pressure that they won't be able to just go forward with whatever just ridiculous plans they had, to just ignore everything the IOC has said and done and just expect the best. So I do think there's potential for it to get blown up, but there's also at least equal potential for it to work out because there are enough people who are motivated to ensure that it does.
So for all the weightlifting fans out there, there's hope. There's hope that it can get turned around. I did the same thing when they brought in the guy from Thailand. It's like the guy from the country with the self-imposed drug ban, the guy that said, hey, listen, doping is so bad in our country. We can't do anything about it. So we're just going to not participate.
Yeah. So the guy who can't solve doping in his own country, admittedly, is going to solve the problem
for
and
the
save
world.
The sport for the Olympics. Yeah. Good call, guys.
Crazy.
Unbelievable. All right. But we came here today to talk about the tactical games and specifically programming for tactical games style training. So I think that it's going to be best for the conversation as a whole if we start by defining what the tactical games are. Things like, what is the competition format? What are the specific events? How are these events scored? How are placements determined? What are the ranks, local, national, world championship kind of level? And then we kind of take it from there. So Greg, I'll kind of let you start, and then Annie, if you want to, you can fill in the gaps.
Sure, if there is any.
I'll leave gaps, I'm sure. So I guess the short description is, you can kind of think of it like a weird mix of obstacle course racing, strongman. I hesitate to say CrossFit for a number of reasons because you're not really doing exercises per se, but it's similar in the sense of the format. Multiple events over the course of 2 days that are, testing a real broad spectrum of athletic capabilities. And then you mix in, pistol and rifle shooting in there. So you had, the typical games is 2 days, 6 events, sometimes 7. They'll throw in a nice surprise one that always ends up being some kind of long run or ruck. Shockingly enough, it's never a snatch or clean and jerk somehow.
Damn it.
Yeah, no, it's some kind of conspiracy. I feel like I take it personally. And so, every event has a raw time score, right? So you're trying to get through these things as fast as possible. And then you have a shooting score, which can vary precisely, but essentially you have, X number of pistol and rifle shots to various target arrays, sequences that you have to remember and, execute properly. And so you are going to have typically 10-second penalties for every miss. There may be times where you have particularly difficult shots that you may get a 30-second bonus for making. There have been times when you'll have, say, a magazine of 10 rounds for your pistol, and you'll have, that many rounds to try to hit a certain target. And once you've hit it, however many rounds are left are each 10-second bonuses. So there are a number of different ways that they can score the shooting side of things. But in any case, the final ranking is done by basically adding the converted time score of the shooting to the raw time of the event, right? So if the event took you 5 minutes, but you had, 6 misses at 10 seconds each, then you're going to have a 6-minute total raw time. And then those are ranked as a percentage of first place. So whoever the first place guy is, that's 100%. And then that second place person, that score is a percentage of first place. That gives you your actual ranking per event.
Okay, cool. Annie, anything you wanted to add there?
No, that's pretty much spot on how it's done. So I think the only thing maybe I'd add is there are rifle events or pistol events. So they've got those. And then I saw recently they added long range. Like maybe, did you see that, Greg?
I saw something that they were talking about having like a sniper specific competition, which I was entering because I'm like Mr. Magoo. I can't see.
Unfortunately, Mr. Gun Show is going to do it. He loves that sort of stuff, but that's another gun.
Yep.
Added to the whole
And
system.
they're not cheap ones either. That's not a BB gun you go pick up at Dick's.
No, it's sure not. I'm glad we were able to bring this up. And if he gets home during this recording, we can. I would like us to rebroach that spot.
Yeah, good luck.
It's a lot of different type of guns, but there are specific rifle. There are specific pistol events. There are obstacles around that for the person that maybe hasn't seen any event like this before. I compare it quite a bit to obstacle course racing. Plus some
which I've never done one of those, so I don't really know.
they seem similar, but you're shooting from high obstacles now.
Yep.
Sure.
Is it somewhat similar to kind of like a CrossFit style competition where you have long time domain and short time domain events? And what might those look like? Like lay out what an actual event might be.
So just about the shortest stage that I can remember was, right around 5 minutes or so, which is going to tend to be something a little, on the heavier side. So it may be that you have a 50-meter course and you've got to get a big sandbag, from one end to the other, drop it, go through a shooting array, bring it back, bring some farmer's handles down, shooting array, bring a sled, that sort of thing, where it's a pretty straightforward linear deal. And if you are strong enough and you can shoot quickly, then you can bang that thing out really fast. And then they'll go all the way the other direction. And to date, which is going to change on Friday, but to date, the longest event that I'm aware of, at least that I've done, was 7 miles, where they took the elite guys, stuck us in the back of a pickup truck and drove 1 mile, which turned out to be 2, then made us run back in full kit, pick up the 65-pound rucks, and then do the 5-mile ruck. It wasn't that most pleasant experience I've had, but
so pretty stinking long duration.
Yeah, it started at 7 p.m. at the end of the first day too. So I would have much rather been home, eating pizza and resting up for the next day, icing my calves. But the national champs first day, the one event we know is going to happen is a 12-mile, 45-pound ruck. The good part about it is that it won't be in kit. So I'm all for that because that makes a huge difference. I'd take a 45-pound pack with no kit over any of the other stuff we've done before. No problem.
So the guy that created the tactical games that was on the front end of that was an old Special Forces veteran, and there's a 12-mile ruck about 45 to 50 pounds in the Gates week of the Special Forces Q course, which I'm sure is probably the inspiration behind that.
My understanding is that's a pretty standard deal in multiple branches, that 12 miles, 45 to 50 pounds in under 3 hours. It's kind of like a basic standard you've got to meet.
Benchmark, yeah.
So how are these events actually scored? Is it similar kind of to the CrossFit game style where the winner gets, 100 points, second place gets 90? Are they collating all your scores at the end of the weekend? The person with the lowest score win or the lowest time wins? How do they go about doing that?
Yeah. So each event, first place is 100. And then based on the combined times of all the other places, that's going to be a percentage of that first place. And then that's going to all add up at the end of the weekend. So the first year I did these, there was a huge problem is they were just using raw times, which meant that whoever was the fastest on a long event essentially would win the whole thing. Like there was no way if you couldn't hang with those, fast, 5-mile run time, that completely outweighed, even 5 other events that were 5 to 10 minutes long. And so they thankfully fixed that because I'm not getting that much better at running. But so it's definitely a better representation now, the ranking and the scoring of the broad abilities versus being weighted towards one or the other, although it's still weighted towards shooting a bit more than it should be for my particular skill set.
And mine as well, sir.
Yeah.
That was actually the next question that I was going to ask. What is that skill that allows you to dominate everyone else? Like, what's the one thing that everyone's like, oh, that guy's really good at, so-and-so, he's obviously going to win.
Well, you really do have to be good at everything. Okay. So Jared Halbert, the guy who's won, I don't know, like 8 or 9 of them or something ridiculous like that. Really phenomenal shooter, USPSA 2-gun, 3-gun competitor. So he's very skilled with the shooting part of it in a wide array of situations and distances and combinations. But then he's also really athletic, so he can get the running stuff done, although he says he's not good at it, which is nonsense. He's still better than me. But he's also pretty strong, and he can pick up the big, heavy 200-pound sandbags. He can get the 145-pound axle bar overhead for a carry. So he really can hit both ranges. But, ultimately, unfortunately for me, it is a shooting competition. So you can be the best athlete out there, even in that whole broad spectrum. But if your shooting is not up to par, it's not going to matter. So, my strategy is go as fast as possible, get that low raw score so I can give myself a buffer for my terrible shooting. And it works sometimes. But, ultimately, if there's an event that's only 5 minutes long that has 60 shots, like if you're not, if your accuracy isn't really high, then you can't outrun a bad shooting score because those 10-second penalties add up really fast.
And you said that's pretty much the standard for the missed shot is that 10-second penalty, but some, it might be 30, some might be less than 10.
That's pretty standard is 10 seconds. Okay. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Now I've got 2 tactical games competitors here, 2 beasts, but you guys come from very different domains. Annie comes from a powerlifting physique sport background. Greg comes from more of the Olympic weightlifting style. So Greg, the first question I wanted to toss to you was, what do you think were like the hardest physical and mental parts of that transition from Olympic weightlifting over to tactical game style training?
Oh, it was running. There's no question. People don't. I think they think I'm exaggerating when I say this, but I'm really not. It's 100% accurate. I spent 15 years becoming as good at not running as possible. You know what I mean? Like my whole sport is you pick it up one time and then you go sit down for 3 to 4 minutes, right? There's no running. There's no extended stuff. We don't do cardio at all. Maybe we sit on an exercise bike for 3 minutes if our knees are particularly achy one day to warm up, but that's it. So the very first one I did, I think was February of 19. There was like a 2.5 mile trail run, and I'm not kidding, man. Halfway through, I couldn't even pick up my toes. Like my anterior tibs were so annihilated. So I wasn't even really out of breath. It was like my legs were so deconditioned for that kind of repetitive use that I was borderline crippled halfway through that thing. And so still to this day, even with my training being geared primarily towards that, that's still by far the hardest thing for me. I can pick up a sandbag and walk around with it. That's okay. Although I prefer a barbell. It's way easier to hold on to and you can actually keep it close to your body. But yeah, the running is just awful.
And if you don't believe, you're sitting back and you're like, oh, I don't know. I don't really trust Greg. If you don't believe that Olympic weightlifters are deconditioned, go to the barbell section of your local CrossFit box and have one of the weightlifters do a double on clean and jerk, a clean and a jerk, and then a clean and a jerk, and listen to their breathing rate.
Yeah.
They will be borderline dead.
Yeah. It's pretty miserable, and I don't think that's a whole lot different for powerlifting, although I do get the sense that in powerlifting there's a little more willingness to throw in some cardio in GPP. Apparently not over here. But in weightlifting, it's just, you just don't do it. And I've been paying the price for that for 2 years, but while I was a weightlifter, it was 100% the right call.
And what's pretty sneaky about the running, it sounds like, is that it's not flat ground running, which you can adapt to pretty quickly. It's trail running, up, down, around obstacles, which is very, very sneaky. And I think if you watch the CrossFit Games and you watch the 2020 ranch run that they did, watch how much that just killed them.
Yeah, I mean the terrain. I would much prefer doing trail runs to running around a track, for example, just because it's more interesting, right?
Yeah.
Running is already the most boring thing you can possibly make me do, besides maybe like rowing. At least you get to sit down on that.
Yes.
But the issue for me, and I think the reason it's so much more difficult, is if you're running in full kit, you've got, minimum 15-pound plate carrier plus belt, possibly with loaded magazines, pistol, and then a rifle, which is a good another 7 pounds. So you're running around with 20, 25 pounds of crap on you. And it's not just the weight, but it's also bouncing around. So it's just uncomfortable the whole time. It's harder to kind of get into a rhythm. It's harder to kind of forget that what you're doing is so miserable. Like they just have a constant reminder. Throw a ruck on top of that, and you just kind of have 45 minutes to 3 hours to, reconsider your choices in life.
And it sounds like you do a lot of that. Andy, how about you? What was the hardest thing about your transition over, given your background?
It was probably running. I had more than most former powerlifters or strongman competitors. Strongman training, God bless. I never thought that was going to come up and be useful for me in life. I'm back, friends. So there was a bit of a learning curve though with running, and for me, running with a kit, learning foot stroke all over again, that was really, really tough. I've been doing some endurance events for quite some time, just occupationally, but putting the kit on, carrying things, that is pretty difficult, and finding a way to, if it's not physically hard, it's boring as well. And that becomes, and I am very interested in hearing a little bit more about Tough, the book coming out, about what, how that has, just the mental strategies you have when you're trying to get through the last thing that you want to do, where you're in pain, where you're not terribly mentally aroused, like what makes you get through those. So for me, it's been a really big lesson in commitments to myself and making sure that I'm getting through the training that I absolutely daggum hate in order to get somewhere better. And that I'm embarrassed to say that was tough for me.
Well, it's nothing embarrassing. I mean, that is the hardest thing, is the mental fortitude and the commitment to do those things that you absolutely cannot stand. And, every second of them makes you question, like, do I really need to be doing this? Like, do I really need to be running right now? I could probably just get on the bike. That would be good enough. Or I'm in shape enough. I can just go, do some more snatches instead. I'll be fine. And of course, that's never true, but sometimes it's really, really enticing.
It really, and there's been, and I'm sure it's the same way with your weightlifting, with anything that all of us have ever done, is that there were times in strongman that I was like, God, I hate this, but it's over in 1 second. It's over in 15 seconds at most. It's done, over, and I'm sitting down. But it sucks to be 6 miles from your house and go,
yeah,
are you kidding me? And to know that you have a pact with someone at your house that did not come pick you up, like, that shit sucks. And that's a tough one. At least in strongman, I was like, it's over soon. It's going to be done.
The good thing about being 6 miles away from your house and having no other options on returning, though, is that you don't have to be committed because you don't have any other options.
Right. Well, you could Uber, but no one's picking you up in your kit.
No, they're driving right by you.
I would.
When we were when we were living in San Francisco, that area, they were particularly adverse. They were like, absolutely not. No way are we picking those two up. Like, that's not going to happen.
There was a CrossFit guy in San Jose who got picked up by the cops because he decided it would be a good idea to put on a plate carrier and a gas mask for his run, but combine it with his errand to take some stuff to the post office. So he ran to the post office carrying a box with a plate carrier and a gas mask. And shockingly enough, people were a little nervous about it.
It's so sketchy. I'm nervous
just
about
take 1 second and think about how that appears, guy. Come on.
You know, something else that I hadn't considered that has been very difficult for me is fine motor skills under fatigue. Like you get to puffing a little bit and your chest gets to heaving, and now they're saying, in here 15 meters from you is a target, let's hit it. I'm already a little bit of a bad shot. Like, I'm already behind the curve on everyone else that's into this. And that is actually pretty surprisingly tough for me as well.
And it's not even, I mean, that is a huge part of it, right? You've got an elevated heart rate, so you're moving around. Your grip is usually somewhat smoked, so you're having trouble even, stabilizing a rifle's usually okay, but stabilizing a pistol, maintaining sight alignment. But then on top of that, you're usually next to 3 or 4 other shooters, and you're listening to their shooting cadence. You don't know whether or not they're shooting accurately. All you can hear is how fast they're shooting, or, their brass is hitting you in the fucking forehead. So you're like, oh God, I got to go. And so, you end up rushing your shots. And again, you don't know if they're accurate or not, but you feel that additional pressure to speed up your own shooting, which then, of course, threatens your accuracy. So, yeah, there's a lot going on. So having not only, the physical ability and kind of that the skill component, but having the focus and the discipline to shoot your own game versus like letting the surroundings kind of dictate your speed and your strategy.
Yeah, Annie. So it sounds like, Annie, it sounds like your biggest carryover, your easiest transition was the strongman stuff, right?
Yeah, and here's why. I think that grip strength is huge. I haven't seen that 400-pound carry, right? Like, I haven't seen that on the girls' side.
You won't, thankfully.
I'm ready if it happens, but I'm pretty sure they're not going to be like, let's give this one away. But the grip strength is really, really good. And having that kind of the tactical side of it, and then by tactical, I mean hand motor skills, being able to mindlessly overgrip things, being able to mindlessly take short, choppy steps. The motor memory from that is really something that has carried over really, really well.
Yeah, and the grip thing is a big one. I mean, coming from weightlifting, grip is obviously a part of it, but we're able to hook grip everything, which helps. You depending on the apparatus, you might or might not be able to hook grip farmers' implements. Like there's definitely a lot more grip stamina in strongman, and that's been something I've had to work a lot on. I can climb a rope, legless in kit. I can do really heavy farmer's carries. I can do really heavy deadlifts with no straps, no hook grip. But when you start adding, multiple grip things, back to back to back for 15 minutes, and, extended periods of time gripping, it's a whole different situation. We had North Carolina a few weeks ago. There was an event where I think it was, I don't even know how many hundreds of yards total of farmers carries it was. And the first maybe 60 yards, you had to grip the axle of the farmer bar versus the handle, which is infinitely more difficult, not only because it's thicker, but primarily because it's hard to balance, right? With the handle, the weight sits below the grip, which means it's stable, whereas you're holding that axle and that whole bar wants to move. So, I mean, that just crushes people, and it crushes me, just not as much as it used to.
It crushes me, and we did axles a lot. But what I do think that is also a huge benefit is you do see a lot of competitors that are heavy on the shooting side, and maybe they do have like a background in law enforcement, a background in military. They have some fitness background as well. They're fit people for sure. Yeah. But they don't have a familiarity with living in their body under stress, under intentional exercise stress. They've certainly been stressed. Don't misread me on that one, but I know how to get my heart rate down. I've seen that be a really big pickle for people. I know how to, I know about how much time it's going to take me to regain fine motor skills if my heart rate gets too high. I have a roundabout, and that's been really helpful. There are some things that are coming to my aid in the offside of me not being a good shot.
So Greg, what do you think your easiest transition or easiest part of the tactical training was, given your background?
Oh, it's just anything strength related.
Okay.
I mean, that's the obvious one is when they put the big sandbag out or the heavier farmer's walks. I'm like, okay, I can probably pick up some time here. Like, for example, in they're all running together. Utah, which is the second to last one I did. There was an event where there was maybe a 1 mile run, some shooting, and it was like a 12 minute cap. So once you were done with the run and the shooting, you had that whatever time remaining to pick up a 150-pound sandbag, carry it 20 yards, put it down, pick it up again, carry it across the line. And basically however many of those you could do you got a 30-second bonus for each one. And so I was like, all right, I need to haul ass through this shooting and then get on that bag. And, I think I did 12 of those, and there were other guys in elite that did like 1 or 2. And so stuff like that is where I'm able to create some distance, but then they all catch me with the shooting eventually anyway. So it's really, I'm just killing myself for no good reason.
Isn't that just competitive barbell sport as a whole? Just killing yourself for no reason?
Essentially, yeah.
All right. So, and because I've seen kind of a big boom in popularity of tactical game style events, and just the tactical side of thing has kind of blown up in popularity, I would compare it similar to kind of like the upswing in popularity of like strongman, or even something like Highlands games, where I had never heard of Highlands games 2 years ago. Now you've got huge groups of individuals talking about that as well. Let's actually get into some of the coaching strategies here. So Greg, you specifically, how do you integrate your weightlifting training into your tactical games, either at the micro level, at the meso level, or both?
I mean, honestly, I've kept it essentially the same as I program for anything, which is I consider the weightlifting to be essentially the skeleton of the program, right? That's the backbone. Everything else is kind of worked around that. It doesn't mean that is the primary thing in terms of volume or even frequency. It just means that is kind of dictating where everything else falls, right? So, for me, I'm now hurtling towards 41 years of age, which is just really awful to admit, but
we don't believe it, Greg. We don't believe it.
I know I don't look a day over 40. But so I've had to overall just cut way down on the volume I've been doing. And the running in particular has just absolutely crushed my legs in terms of my top end strength. And I've had a few injuries to boot that haven't helped, groin strains and knee issues and stuff like that have kind of really knocked me off track in terms of the weightlifting side of things. But that aside, I've had to cut way back. So essentially, I've got, one day where I will do some kind of snatch variation, for a meso cycle. I'll change that every meso. Sometimes a pulling variation, and then a squat. So could be back squat, pause back squat, partials, front squat, whatever. And then a second day, I will do usually some kind of jerk related exercise, usually a push press, and then other, pressing accessory stuff. And then a third day, which is going to be clean and jerk, a clean pull, deadlift sort of thing. And that structure has kind of allowed me to keep what I need to maintain that strength as I slowly crawl toward my grave. And while balancing, all the additional stuff that I didn't have to do prior, I didn't have to spend all this time running every week and riding that stupid assault bike and, throwing sandbags around and climbing ropes and just running around my property like a lab monkey that got out.
How actually have you handled, because what was the heaviest weight class you competed at when you were a weightlifter? You were a 102?
105. Yeah.
Okay. 105. What has your weight done since you've made the transition over?
I'm walking around between 95 and 96 kilos these days.
Okay.
So
that's kind of what I figured.
What is that? Like 215 ish, I think.
So we'll call it that.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't convert that direction, but, I'm definitely on the larger, heavier side, for that competition. Although, one of my buddies there who competes, Zach, is, a few inches taller than me and definitely outweighs me by, 15 pounds or so. And he can outrun me too. He's got that strongman background, but he's also in law enforcement. So he's had that training background where he's maintaining that ability to run. And so it definitely can be done at that bigger body weight. But, to be honest, I think that sweet spot's probably like that 190 to 200 pound range. If you really want to be able to perfectly balance everything, but I'm not going to get below 200 pounds again.
Have you changed anything up nutritionally or like recovery wise to accommodate the new training demands?
Fortunately, it's been pretty similar. I already was having to eat a lot because my natural body weight is not this high. And so, being, 231 is 105. And so I would walk around at, between 233 and 235, ideally, outside of competition. And so it took a lot of work for me to maintain that weight. So really when I transitioned over to this kind of stuff, even at a lighter body weight, I'm eating a little bit less, but I still have a pretty high carb intake and really high protein intake. So it didn't change a whole lot. And to be honest, like at least me personally, I don't see a lot of performance or recovery variation when that nutrition varies. Yeah. Which is not the case for a lot of people I work with. So I think I'm just a weirdo. Like stuff just doesn't work for me. Like you can give me any number of medications and they'll work for a day and then I just stop working. Like I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but
scary thing.
It's super weird. Like you can give me Ambien and I'll be like, all right, let's go rage. What are we doing next? It doesn't do anything. I could be sleepwalking and I just don't know it. I don't know.
Right. Greg is the least
totally
fun
conscious
person to party with.
Yeah.
Takes
might murder you
work
in your
once,
sleep,
takes him the second time. He's like, what the fuck? I don't feel anything.
Yeah. Do we need to do more? Do we need to crush it up and snort it? Is this not working? And the recovery stuff, luckily I have access to hot tub, cold plunge, sauna, Normatec, all that stuff. And I use it all regularly. And that's the contrast for me is probably the biggest help. And I'll try to sauna at least once a week, but I just don't enjoy it. So sometimes that doesn't happen.
Yeah. All right, Annie, I was coming for you. Same question. How do you integrate your training? So I believe you're still on track for some physique-based goals, still some kind of strength endurance-y style training in there. How do you kind of manage all those demands?
Well, one of them is managing my expectations on that for sure. And it comes to like what my body looks like. I'm kind of at the spot where I'm like, well, if it looks like this forever, it looks like this forever. That's just literally where I'm at with it. I am in a really aerobic biased place because I suck aerobically and I've got enough time to build a pretty good aerobic base before anything pops off. So, but similarly, I've had some injuries and some ouchies. And so if you get under a 600-pound yoke and you weigh 150 pounds, you eventually just get shorter and you feel shitty for like years afterwards. So
weird.
My body is approaching.
That math checks out.
Yeah.
My body is approaching 40 5 years old, perhaps. And so I've got some injuries and some things that I have to be very, very cognizant of. And something that's helped quite a bit is I'm on my bike a lot. Just developing an aerobic base, making sure I'm keeping the skill of running. So I run 2 or 3 times a week, but not a ton of mileage. I'm not putting a shit ton of miles on my feet. Doing a lot of my long distance aerobic development stuff that I'm just hoping has the right carryover. It has historically, but I will be honest, it's a prayer. It's a prayer. And also, my husband's a large guy. He's a big guy too. And so getting him, and he's also approaching 40. And he needs to stay off his feet a little bit. So we're biking quite a bit. We're squatting. We're overhead pressing. He's full on still doing cleans and snatches and things like that. I'm just kind of overhead pressing. And then...
Speaking of fine motor skills.
Do you see that?
Pen.
Yes.
That was a mind game, Greg. That was a mind game that I threw in there. And then we're doing squats, deadlifts, overhead pressing. Not much else other than that. Right now, looking for quality movements, making sure we still have those big movements. And then I have a little bit of a plan based on how much time we have and how we're progressing. But we'll go into strength endurance probably next, and we'll go into event specific training. So more farmer carries for him, probably more sled type stuff when we get a little bit closer. And that is one of those more fragile adaptations I've found. So we'll kind of work with that. And we're at the range a lot, like at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. And he still shoots guns for a living. So we are at the range a lot.
Yeah, so I mean, you're genuinely doing some periodization then, like you're moving through phases as you get close to competition. Yeah, that's
very
good.
much very genuine. But I've also, how long can I keep that up if this is one of those things that every other month you compete?
Yeah, and that's what's happened to me is this year I did just like back to back to back to back. So it's like I never had, I had I think a 5-week break and then a 2-week break,
right? And
then 8 weeks now into this one. So I've just been hammered.
Yeah, and I think what's really tough about specifically that type of schedule is you can't get too specific because it's so different. The events are so different, and they're broadly the same on like a molecular level, but there's a skill component that deserves some time or just a broad approach towards.
Yeah, and the funny thing, the first one that I did, with this friend of mine who talked me into doing it, he had looked at some video from a previous one, and it was all these like short, quick events. And so we're like, oh yeah, this is perfect. We, that 5 to 6 minute domain, this is right up our alley. And then all of a sudden we get there and we're like, yeah, they changed it up a little bit. And so it's changed quite a bit, which I think is good. You want to have that variety, but like you said, you can't get too specific. It's like you have to be very familiar with the common implements and, know your way around farmers' handles, backwards, upside down, forward, whatever, overhead, zercher, sandbags, definitely, rope climbing and sleds. So if you're very literate with those implements, you can usually figure the stuff out, as long as you've built the, like you said, kind of the molecular level capacity at all those, the ranges. You have the strength endurance, you have the stamina, and you have the straight up endurance. Easier said than done, of course.
Right.
As I sit here struggling to run. Right.
This is pretty new. Like this is new to me. Like this is a new thing for me to do, and I'm sure for most people that are doing it. So I'm still in the game of doing what I think is going to be right, and I'm totally down to be wrong. Well, I'm sure I'll tell you. This didn't pan out. I'm sure there will be many, many moments like that where what I decided to do, what I thought was right, was not the right call.
Well, you can't be 100% right, and you can't. Speaking of managing expectations, you can't predict exactly what's going to happen. My biggest problem is that I'm not quite willing to commit my training 100% to tactical games.
Yep.
I'm maybe at 80%. But I'm still putting a lot more emphasis on the weightlifting side of things than I would if I were 100% committed to tactical games. One, because I like doing it, but two, because that's my livelihood, is being totally engaged in the weightlifting world as a coach. And for me, like a big part of that is keeping that very personal connection to the training, and so if I'm not able to do that, if I'm not able to still lift well enough and maintain my positions and those movements enough to do like demos for people, then I'm in trouble. So I would probably do things a little differently if I didn't have to do that, but I'm close enough,
That's the beauty of it, is you can stay true to the things that are organic to you.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Greg, it sounded like you were a little bit surprised when you heard that Annie was using somewhat of like a periodized approach to her kind of tactical game style training. So a question that I had for you is the circles that you run with, the individuals that you compete alongside of, that you talk with, what are some of the big errors that they're making in their own programming, their own training for these specific events?
Well, to backtrack a second, I wasn't surprised so much as I was kind of envious, like to have enough time to actually periodize. I would love to do that. And maybe next year I'll slow the pace down a little bit and be able to get back to that. But I would say the number one biggest mistake that people doing tactical games make, but also just in general, is not regularly, not having deload periods regularly enough. And it's kind of this thing where it's like, well, I can keep going, so I should keep going. It's like, well, I can do a lot of things, but they're a really bad idea. You know what I mean? Like I can go buy, 2 grams of Coke and a few hookers, but I'm not going to because it's a bad idea. So in the same way, you can keep pushing your training forever. Eventually, you're going to start breaking down. You're going to end up with stress fractures. You're going to end up with all kinds of strains. You're going to end up, not sleeping well, GI distress, your joints are going to be killing you. And so it's like, there's a difference between being tough and committed and just being dumb. And so, yeah, you got to kind of flirt with that line sometimes, but you also have to be intelligent enough to know, like, hey, I'm not actually invincible. I'm not a 19-year-old who's like eating babies' pituitary glands every day, and I can do whatever I want forever. And so once you kind of get past maybe that weird sense of shame that a lot of people with athletic backgrounds have about not training at 100% every single day forever, because you feel like you're not doing enough. Once you kind of get past that and realize, like, no, this is actually the intelligent approach that will ultimately allow me to make more progress and hit a greater ultimate level of performance, I think that ends up creating some pretty dramatic improvements in people's training once they figure out the schedule that works best for them. So it's not periodization in the traditional sense, where we're not running 12, 16, 22 week cycles, but we're maybe working in 4-week blocks where we're backing off every 4th week, or whatever is appropriate for the individual, and that can change meso to meso too.
Annie, I'm glad you brought up managing expectations. That was somewhat fortuitous of kind of like the overarching of our entire conversation here. But Greg, it's really refreshing to hear you say that, because I've been preaching for years that babies' pituitary glands are the key here. That's the key.
The access is the limiter, right?
Thank you.
People are very peculiar about that.
Does it have the gifted performance stamp of approval, but you can throw a Catalyst Athletics performance or a Catalyst Athletics stamp of approval.
Wasn't there was a whole South Park episode about that, right? Where
I'm sure there was.
Hartman was reproducing Shakey's Pizza's locations by harvesting stem cells or something like that. It's the same. It's the same essential structure, but a little different.
Same pathway. Pathway. All right, Annie, how about you? Mistakes that you're seeing other either coaches or athletes making that really make you scratch your head or make you want to slam your head into a wall or something?
Pushing through pain in a way that they don't have to. I think that's huge. I think people like to put rucks on and go until their legs fall off, and that's not a smart or healthy or helpful approach in whatsoever. Training these capacities that are pretty specific in ways that are totally non-specific and not applicable. Well, I know there's not going to be a bike at this thing, so just ignore that I said all this, but I do see a lot of people doing their running and their aerobic development work in this kind of worthless middle ground that doesn't make them faster and it doesn't give them endurance benefits, and it has a high recovery cost and it makes the rest of their lifting shitty. I think that's probably the overarching goal of what I see people doing poorly in tactical performance coaching. But it's a new developing field, I would say, in a weird way, even though it's clearly been a field of occupational athletes forever. This whole idea is pretty fresh and pretty new. So I guess this answer will probably also change in a year as I see more people taking a stab at their own efforts towards it. And probably myself, I'll say like, oh yeah, I really fucked that up back there. But
yeah. Well, I think the interesting thing is, like you said, this sort of thing generally has been around so long in the military, but you can prepare very specifically for the various schools and selection.
Yep.
You know exactly what's going to happen, right? You know you're going to have to run X number of miles in Y time. You know you're going to have to ruck, whatever. You know you're going to have to swim. You know you're going to have to do this many push-ups and pull-ups, and so you can structure your training entirely specifically to that. And the problem, though, is that doesn't translate well enough to something like the tactical games, which throws in a whole array of different implements and situations that you're not prepared for by doing a bunch of push-ups. So, push-ups are cool. Like, I do them sometimes because I don't want to have the chest of like a 13-year-old child, but it's not like that's super specific. There's not a tactical games where they're like, all right, drop and give me 6,000. It's like, okay, well, if you're an intermediate or something, you can't climb a rope, you can do 15 burpees, or whatever, whatever it is. That's about the most that's going to help.
Right. What's interesting is even with those selections that you can prep for, the various military selections, they do a really weird job preparing you for the actual constraints of perhaps battle. And a very funny conversation that I hear a lot is, believe it or not, when I was in the sandbox and I had my buddy who was hurt over my shoulder and I finally got to the embassy, nobody said I need 45 push-ups in 2 minutes with your like,
shocker.
Nobody said that. And I love that whole reality is like, man, even these selection processes are just general fitness, just a bit above.
Yeah, and I think this is me speaking as a guy with no military background, so take it with a grain of salt, but I would say that 95% of those things is more about testing people's fortitude and their commitment versus actually preparing them physically for the requirements of the job, right?
Yeah.
It's more like, can we destroy you for this number of weeks and, put you in a place where quitting is like the most wonderful idea you can possibly think of at that time, and then you're willing to keep doing this and beating yourself to death because you're so committed to the process and the end goal, versus we're going to use this to prepare you for what's coming. Like, that comes after the selection. And so I think that's kind of the confusing thing for a lot of people who either haven't gone through those selections or might be, looking at them in the future, is they conflate those two things. And so they think, oh, this is how, I want to train like an operator. So I'm going to go do my, my flutter kicks, my push-ups, and my, 400-mile run every day. It's like, well, I mean, that might get you through selection, but it's, once you're done, you probably got to rearrange your process a little bit.
Absolutely.
Those mental aspects are huge. And I think that offers a pretty good segue, because I'm dying to hear about the book you've got coming out. So Greg, it's all done? Completely edited? Finished?
Yeah, it's been done since June, and it's been we don't have enough hours in the world left to talk about the soup sandwich that was the publishing deal. But in any case, yeah, it's been done for a while, and it's going to be out February 16th, thankfully.
So what was the Inception story? What kind of gave you the motivation to write that? Just give us like a brief synopsis of what people are going to find in the book.
I mean, the original idea, I have notes dating back to 2011 on it. So it's been in my head for a long time. And the problem was that I was never quite sure what it was supposed to be. And so when I finally figured it out, then I was able to bang it out pretty quickly. But I think the origin is really this idea that the kind of the definition of toughness, I think, has been misunderstood and misrepresented, and to the detriment of so many people. And there's a lot of confusion around it, where we have, some people think it's all about, physical capabilities. Some people equate toughness with masculinity specifically, or they equate toughness with violence or a lack of emotion, like all these weird characteristics that don't really have anything to do with being tough per se, but they've been associated in various ways through media and storytelling, or just people's insane imaginations, whatever the case may be. And so that was kind of part one, is not literally part one in the book structure, but part one of the book is kind of explaining what I believe toughness to actually be, and what the characteristics are, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And really what it came down to was 4 things that all conveniently start with the letter C. And this was not intentional, but it just happened to be super cool. So you have character is part one, right? So who are you? Do you really truly know who you are? And the corollary to that is, are you secure in that identity? Right? If you don't know who you are, if you don't truly know what your values are, and you're not secure in those things, you are constantly searching for validation and approval and all these things, which prevent you from ever actually doing anything worthwhile, right? You're the person on Instagram who's, somehow got the camera up the butt, even though there's a 5,000 square foot empty gym on the other side of you. You get what I'm saying? And then, part two is capability, which is, essentially we need a very broad, wide-ranging, and ever-growing collection of abilities, right? These skills, knowledge, literal physical capabilities, fitness-wise, things like that. The next one is capacity, which I basically define as what can you withstand, right? So this is your ability to get through hardship, adversity, challenges, and that's primarily the mental strategies, but it's also dependent on capability to a large extent, right? If you fall out of an airplane in the middle of the, desolated wilderness area, maybe you have the will to survive, but if you don't have any skills, it's not going to get you very far, right? You don't have the physical ability to get through that, you're not going to make it. And then the final one is commitment, which kind of encompasses the whole discipline and routine and habit building side of things. And that's essentially, maybe you have these first 3 things in order, but without that commitment element, you will never actually put them to use when it matters, right? So maybe you have these capabilities, but if you're not willing, you don't have the commitment to, create structure in your life that allows you to continually train, practice, improve, learn, all these different things. And it's essentially meaningless ultimately. So that's the long, short version. And so the book is basically both looking at those things from the philosophical side, what does this mean? Why is it important? And then from the practical side, okay, how do we actually, how do we develop these traits in ourselves, and how do we continue moving down this road indefinitely, right? Like, it's not a weekend project like cleaning out the attic. It's this thing that, we are doing every single moment of our lives, and becoming cognizant of our behavior and everything from the way that we react to other people to the way that we talk to ourselves during the midst of adversity, all these different things. So it's all in there. It's the perfect book. It's the last book you'll ever need to read.
You heard it here first. Well,
That's
genuinely for me, Greg. I mean, I've appreciated almost all the content you've put out, so I will absolutely be a customer, and I'm sure Annie will be as well. Just let everyone know where they can find it, where they can pre-order it. It should be, by the time this recording goes live, it will be available for pre-order or actual sale. So where can they actually find that?
So becomingtough.com will be the website, and that will give you links to all the availability. So this initial release will be hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. So all the standard places, Amazon, BNN.com, iBooks, basically whatever place you like getting books from, you should be able to get it from.
Yeah, I'm actually very grateful that you didn't name the book Hard, because Becoming Hard will take you to a very, very different part of the internet.
Yeah, that would have opened us up for a bit of confusion and a lot of explaining.
But the octogenarian population may have visited your page quite a bit.
It would 100% have increased web traffic.
Yes, absolutely. And from what I've told on Instagram, that's the most important thing.
It's not good audience targeting, to be fair. But yeah, the numbers would have been astounding.
Phenomenal. Greg, is there anything you wanted to circle back to? Anything you wanted to revisit on our conversation?
No, I think we covered it. I mean, I'm so brain dead at this point, man. I'm tired. I'm beat up. So unless you tell me I missed something, I feel like we got it all.
It sounds like you're ready to compete. If you're that mentally dead, it sounds like you are ready to compete. Annie, anything on your end?
Life is good, man. Greg, I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
If you guys didn't know, Greg, let everyone know where they can find you, the Instagram, the Facebook, the YouTube, all that.
Catalyst Athletics on Instagram. That's kind of the hub. And then catalystathletics.com, of course, is, articles, videos, everything you can think of that I do can all be found from there. So that's the place to go. I'm not super active on Facebook.
Can I plug your Instagram, Becoming Tough, at Becoming Tough?
Of course you can.
I'll plug it. It's good. It's got good, digestible.
Consider it plugged.
Greg, and I have to say, thank you for everything. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for making informative YouTube videos about weightlifting that are like 90 to 120 seconds.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because there's definitely a split of opinion on that. There's either the crowd who's like, oh, thank God you didn't spend 45 minutes explaining something that can be explained in 1 minute. And then the other crowd's like, ooh, it's only 60 seconds. I already watched 5 seconds of commercials. It's like, okay, sorry. Like, you want your money back?
All right. Well, we can all agree. Fuck those people. All right. Well, as always, you can find me at @_squatfather, at Gifted Performance on Instagram. Go ahead, drop like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff that YouTube people say. We will catch you on the next one. And as always, guys, stay gifted. See ya.
Thanks, guys.